If you're watching this now, I need you to understand something before we go on, not after, now. The quantum field doesn't reveal certain information to just any consciousness or at any time. It doesn't work like a public loudspeaker. It works like a selective, precise, cold mathematical system. And when it delivers a message, it only does so when everything is aligned. This is one of those moments. The fact that this video found you, not that you searched for it. It's not a coincidence. It's not luck. And please, don't blame the algorithm just to reassure yourself. That's just a modern excuse for not accepting the obvious. There was a choice, not a conscious one, not a forced one, but a choice nonetheless. This message can only be received once, not because it will disappear, but because you'll never be in exactly this state again. Tomorrow you'll be someone else. Next week too. Even an hour from now, something will already be different. But right now, you're exactly on the right frequency. If you feel that strange sensation like recognition, as if something inside you says this was it, it's not imagination or cheap suggestion. It's precise perception. Your consciousness has just, for a moment, become perfectly tuned. Like a radio that, without trying, lands right on the right signal. And that tuning doesn't last forever. The quantum field aligned the moment, your internal state, even the reason why you had time to be here now. You're not watching a video. You're receiving a transmission, and it only makes sense at this exact point in your life. What you're about to hear isn't here to motivate you or inspire you for a while. It's here to rearrange the way you understand your place in reality. That's why you should stay. This moment won't happen again. The quantum field doesn't transmit to everyone at the same time. It doesn't hand out spiritual pamphlets. It delivers specific information to specific consciousnesses at very specific moments. And this moment is for you. Not because you are spiritual or special in the childish sense of the word, but because you are available. What is happening now is not content consumption. It's recognition. Something found you when you were ready to be found. This kind of message doesn't appear when you search for it anxiously. It appears when your level of openness matches exactly what can be received. That's why now, not before, not after. Maybe a part of you already suspected it. That feeling of arriving just in time, of hearing something that you know you wouldn't have been able to understand the same way some time ago. That's not auto-suggestion, it's deep memory being activated. Most people go through experiences like that without realizing it. They watch the video, listen to the words, and move on. For them, it's just another interesting idea, a curious theory to talk about and forget. But if you're here and something resonates with you, it's because you're not just listening with your mind. There's something deeper involved. And before we continue, there's something you need to know. The quantum field didn't bring you here to entertain you, nor to give you a nice feeling for a few minutes. It brought you here because something is ready to be activated. Something that has been preparing for a long time through experiences that, at the time, seemed like mistakes, losses, or detours. Nothing was a waste. Nothing was out of place. Every situation sharpened your perception for this exact moment, even the ones you swore had ruined your life, especially those. And what comes next will only fall into place if you receive it now. With the awareness you have today, don't analyze it as information. Don't try to understand it quickly. This isn't meant to be processed, it's meant to be recognized. So before moving forward, take an internal pause. Don't go on as if this were just another video. Stay present. Because recognition begins when you accept something simple, uncomfortable, and powerful at the same time. You didn't get here by chance. Start viewing your life from a new perspective. Because nothing, absolutely nothing, that brought you here was disconnected, isolated, or accidental. The quantum field doesn't improvise. It doesn't act by chance. It doesn't try to see what happens. It orchestrates. It adjusts. It prepares. And if you're receiving this message, it's because there was a silent preparation happening for a long time, even when you had no idea that something was being prepared. The field doesn't send signals into the void. It sends transmissions when consciousness reaches a certain level of receptivity. And that level doesn't appear all of a sudden. It's built, it's cultivated, you move through it many times. And this is the ironic part, through experiences that didn't seem spiritual or elevated or even connected to awakening. Quite the opposite. Moments of confusion, ruptures, that persistent feeling of not quite fitting in, of looking at what used to seem normal and feeling like it just doesn't make sense to you anymore. That was also part of the process. Tell me if this sounds familiar to you. In the last few months, you started noticing coincidences that you could no longer ignore. Not just simple amusing coincidences, but situations so precise that it was as if the future had been planned. And that's what brought it to this point, and that's what led to this point, and to numbers that kept repeating, overlapping messages. People saying exactly the phrase you needed to hear without knowing why. That wasn't spiritual decoration. It was training. The field was sharpening your attention, teaching you to see. Because before you receive a message, you have to learn to recognize when something isn't random. Most people live immersed in noise. Everything seems the same to them, flat, meaningless. The world doesn't speak to them because they're not listening. But when consciousness starts to awaken, something changes. The world stops being silent. It starts to respond. Maybe you also felt an urgency that's hard to explain. Not anxiety, not fear, something deeper, an inner feeling. I have to understand something. There's something more. I can't keep going like before. It wasn't an intellectual question. It was coming from deep inside you. You knew you were reaching a threshold. That feeling doesn't come from the mind. It comes from the field recognizing itself through you. And when that starts to happen, life speeds up. It becomes more intense. Time grows more intense. It starts to feel compressed. Changes that used to take years now happen in months or weeks. Relationships that seemed stable either change or fall apart. Paths you thought were certain stop resonating. Not because something is wrong, but because the timing is not compatible with the frequency you're starting to hold. Here's something important that many misunderstand. When the field starts to prepare you, it doesn't do it by making your life more comfortable. That's a pretty expensive New Age myth. It does it by making you more capable, more aware, more present, more responsible for what you perceive and what you choose. Comfort numbs, friction awakens. And if everything is moving, if nothing ever really stays still, if you feel like something is pushing you to leave behind old versions of yourself, it's not punishment, it's not chaos, it's not that you've lost your way. It's the field adjusting you, preparing you to handle what's coming next. And that's only just starting to take shape now. Every challenge you went through wasn't a punishment or some pointless test from the universe playing at being cruel. It was training to withstand uncertainty, to let go of control when it was no longer useful, to trust even when you didn't have the map or a signal. No one confirmed you were on the right path. Think about it for a second with brutal honesty. If today someone talked to you about co-creation, active consciousness, a reality that responds to your internal state, would you have been able to listen to it 5 years ago? Probably not. Not because you were less intelligent, but because you hadn't lived enough yet to recognize it for yourself. The field didn't need you to believe, it needed you to gather evidence. That's why there were moments when everything went inexplicably well. Situations that worked out in your favor with no apparent logic, chance encounters that changed your course, opportunities that appeared just when they seemed impossible. That wasn't luck. It was the field gradually showing you that reality isn't rigid, that it responds, that it listens. But at the same time, and here's the part that many people romanticize in the wrong way, there were also breakups, isolation, stages where what used to matter to you started to feel empty. Conversations without substance, other people's worries that no longer resonated with you. It wasn't arrogance, it was the noise fading away. The field needed inner silence so you could perceive something more subtle. That feeling of being a little outside the world, of not quite fitting into the collective narrative, wasn't a system error. You were being extracted. Like taking a radio out of a room full of interference so you can pick up a specific frequency. You weren't being set aside as punishment. You were being tuned. And there were probably moments, especially before you got to this video, when you clearly felt that something was coming. You didn't know what. You had no way to describe it, but it was there. A strange certainty. Something is going to change. Something is going to change. Something is about to reveal itself. That wasn't futurism or anxiety, it was consciousness. Anticipating this moment because it was already part of the journey. The field knew you were going to get here, and it knew exactly what you needed to experience before in order to receive what you're receiving now. If any piece had been missing, the message wouldn't have reached you, or it would have arrived. But it wouldn't be understood. And here comes something important, almost uncomfortable to admit. Not everyone who goes through this content is receiving the same thing. Many will only listen to it with their minds. They'll say interesting, deep, curious, and go on with their day. But if something inside you feels that this is not just information, it's because your consciousness is not just observing from the outside, it's participating. Pay attention to your body while you listen or read this, not to the words, but to what is happening within you. That's your consciousness participating. A softness in your chest, maybe warmth. Maybe a slow expansion, or a deep stillness you didn't know was available. That's not suggestion. It's resonance. The field doesn't communicate only with ideas. It communicates by not observing. Communication with consciousness has already started. Not when you understood something, but when you stopped resisting feeling. That's why right now your attention isn't the same as at the beginning. It's more present, more focused. Almost as if something were listening through you, instead of you listening from the outside. That's because there isn't a real separation between you and the field. There never was. There was only a functional illusion necessary to live the human experience. But when the time comes to remember, that illusion starts to loosen. And when it loosens, you never look at reality the same way again. And here it's important to understand something that completely changes the way you live. The field doesn't reward, it doesn't punish. It's not that you act and then deserve something or not. That's a human projection. The field responds, period. It responds to coherence, not to effort. It responds to alignment, not to sacrifice. It responds to sustained internal states, not to desperate requests. That's why there are people who do everything right and still feel constant friction, and others who seem to move forward without struggling. It's not luck, it's not privilege, it's state, hope, sustained frequency. It's congruence between who you are, what you feel, and what you do. However, if you're still here, congratulations. Seriously. This isn't for everyone, and it never was. There's a point in the video where only those who don't need proof remain, just recognition. If you're one of them, right below, I'm still awake. Don't explain it. Those who know, know. When you're fragmented internally, the field reflects fragmentation. When you're aligned, the field stops opposing you. And aligned doesn't mean perfect, positive, or elevated all the time. It means honest. It means to stop pretending to be someone you're no longer. It means not betraying yourself internally just to fit in externally. That's what started to happen before you got here. You started to lose interest. You started holding on to versions of yourself that were no longer real. You started to get tired of explaining yourself, of justifying yourself, of adapting to frameworks that no longer represented you. And that tiredness wasn't weakness, it was a sign. The field starts to respond differently when you stop negotiating your own perception. That's why now many decisions feel simpler, even though from the outside they might seem risky. Not because you have all the answers, but because you're no longer divided. And when there's no internal division, action becomes clear. You might notice that you no longer need to convince yourself of what you feel. That when something doesn't resonate, you don't need to explain it. That when something is coherent, the body knows it before the mind does. That's integration. And from that place, reality starts to behave differently, not in a dramatic or spectacular way, but in a precise way. As if the world stopped pushing you and started supporting you. But pay attention, this doesn't mean that everything is comfortable. It means that everything starts to become meaningful. The challenges that appear now aren't trying to break you. They're trying to expand your capacity to hold. They're not here to confuse you. They're here to sharpen your perception even more. Because the field doesn't open all at once, and that's it. It opens completely, in layers, and this is an important layer. From now on, you're going to notice something subtle but decisive. You don't react the same way anymore. The same situations don't trigger you like before. The same stimuli don't grip you as strongly. Not because you've become indifferent, but because you're no longer asleep on autopilot. That's what really changes when the field starts to operate through you and not on you. You stop being driven by your surroundings and start moving from your inner center. And that core isn't built, it's remembered. That's why this doesn't feel like learning something new. It feels like returning to something that was always there, but had been covered by noise, by urgency, by constant adaptation. What comes after this point isn't more information, it's more responsibility. Responsibility to maintain the state you now recognize. Responsibility not to numb yourself again with distractions when something inside calls you to be present. Responsibility not to minimize what you perceive just to fit in. Because once you see, you can't unsee. And the field responds differently when it knows you already know. This is the real threshold, not a mystical moment, not a spectacular revelation, but rather the unseen, silent transition between living reactively and living in conscious response. And from here, the question is no longer what is going to happen. The question is, what state will you be in when you allow it to happen? And when that changes, reality has no choice but to respond. But it doesn't respond all at once or with fireworks. It responds by reorganizing, first inside, then outside. That's why, after this point, you might not see great miracles, but something more unsettling, clarity. You will start to see very clearly what is a yes and what is a no, which decision expands you and which one contracts you, which thought brings you order and which one drains you. That clarity isn't always comfortable since you can't fool yourself like before. Before, you could justify yourself, distract yourself, numb certain intuitions. Now, not so much. Not because someone is watching you, but because your own system has become more sensitive. That's a sign of real integration. The quantum field doesn't need you to do more. It needs you to distort. Less self-deception, less unnecessary noise. Less living based on inherited reactions. When you stop reacting, you start responding. And responding is a conscious act, not an impulsive one. You may notice that now silence feels more nourishing to you than constant stimulation. That certain conversations tire you out, even though they used to entertain you. That you no longer need to fill every empty space with information or opinions or distractions. That's not isolation, that's you recovering your energy. Because you perceive the field better when your energy isn't scattered in 1,000 directions. And the more undivided your attention is, the more precise the response you receive. From here on, the practice is simple but not superficial. It's not about controlling thoughts, but about choosing the inner place you live from. It's not about artificially raising your vibration, but about what makes you more conscious. You already know what dims your light. Every time you choose coherence, even if it's uncomfortable, the field aligns a little more. Every time you betray yourself to avoid discomfort, the signal gets weaker. There is no punishment, there is feedback. And that feedback is immediate when you're awake. That's why this message doesn't come with grand promises, it comes with something more serious. Conscious responsibility. Responsibility to recognize that your inner state isn't just for show. That how you think, how you feel, and how you act when no one is watching matters. Not morally, energetically. And here's the final point that few people understand. The field doesn't ask you to be special. It asks you to be real. Real with what you feel. Real with what no longer resonates. Real with what you know and have been putting off. When you're real, the system stops opposing you because there's no longer any internal conflict to reflect. And then without forcing anything, life starts to adjust itself around that truth. Not because everything is easy, but because everything is coherent. And that coherence, once you experience it, you no longer want to live any other way. If this message resonated with you, it's no coincidence that the next video is there. Not everyone has to watch it. In fact, most people won't click. And that's exactly why their life doesn't change. If you feel like this is for you, don't overthink it. The next video is where this transmission stops being just understanding and becomes power in action.